Welcome to the Find Your Leadership Confidence podcast with Vicki Nedling. You are about to discover impactful lessons that help you grow as an individual, grow your confidence, and find the positive and good within you, so you powerfully and authentically become the best version of yourself. Be sure you visit our website at www.findyourleadershipconfidence.com. While you're there, subscribe to us via your favorite network. Now tune in, get ready, and enjoy the journey of emerging as a leader of exception in the 21st century.
Welcome, everyone, to the Find Your Leadership Confidence podcast. I'm your host, Vicki Nedling, coming to you from Roswell, Georgia. The goal of this podcast is to bring topics and guests that will empower you to become that confident leader and take your business or your life to the next level. Today, I am excited to have John Daniel as my guest, and let me tell you about John. John is an online high-performance coach specializing in high-level professionals. By integrating fitness, health, and mindset optimization, John helps clients boost energy, focus, and business success simultaneously. With a focus on mindset cultivation and personalized strategies, John equips his clients with tools to achieve fitness and business goals. From weight loss to muscle building and revenue enhancement, John has guided hundreds to success. John believes in fitness beyond aesthetics, fostering confidence and resilience. As your coach, John is going to provide tailored plans to elevate your well-being and unlock your true potential. So if you are ready to prioritize your health and thrive in every aspect of life, you'll want to check out John's website. But for now, let's talk about mind and body alignment, unlocking your full potential. Please join me in welcoming John Daniel. Hi, John.
Hi, thank you so much for that splendid introduction. I'm super excited for this juicy conversation about diving into really what mind and body alignment means.
And I think it's such a great topic because so often people in business, whether entrepreneur or corporate or small business owners, they get so focused on one aspect, growing the business, growing the revenue, doing things right, and being perfect. And they forget about the other aspect, which is your body, your health, your fitness. How are you going to live your legacy, build your legacy if you're ill, sick in bed, or worse? And self-care sometimes just gets put on the back shelf, not even ever dusted off. So I'm so excited to talk about how important mind and body alignment is to becoming that successful entrepreneur or business owner.
Definitely. And I think, Vicky, you hit the nail on the head. A lot of the times when we're operating at a very, very high level, we almost put up these blinders or distractions around the priority that's driving the success in the forefront, which is our health and our mind. And a lot of
Yeah.
the times when we talk about health, people think, it's losing 10 pounds or it's gaining the muscle that you had mentioned. But a lot of the times it really starts between the 6 inches between our two
Yeah.
ears. And so when we're bringing that conscious awareness in, involving that in how we're operating in our professional lives, a lot of the times we can start to really see some clarity in these areas that we may have had those blinders up around.
Yeah. Before we get into the tough stuff, let's talk about the easy question first, which is just tell everybody where you currently live.
Yeah, I'm living in Austin, Texas. I'm originally from Denver, Colorado. Me and Vicky were chatting before the show, and I have definitely had a little bit of a climate shock moving to Austin, Texas, rolling into the summertime. So I'm living in Austin, Texas, surrounded by a lot of high-level entrepreneurs, a lot of high-level executives. So it's a great environment for growth.
Yeah, Austin's a real creative town too. Lots of good music, arts, and really has grown up in its last 20 years, I would say.
Most definitely.
So I always ask the guests to really share about their journey. And for you, you have such a great story to share with people that I think they'll resonate with. Not everybody, but I think a good many people can resonate with the struggle that you had with addiction and depression, and then overcoming that, finding the resilience to become this successful owner, business owner, and leader in your community. So talk to us about what your journey was like over these last many years.
I love that question. It's something that hits really home for me. It's something that really drives the fuel of all of the success that I've had today and ultimately sheds onto the people that I'm leading. So I can rewind this all the way back into my real formative years. I
Yeah.
was raised in the shadows of addiction, like you mentioned, depression, a lot of anxiety. There was an absence of my biological father that was in and out of my life, going from jail to coming back to the weekend and then leaving for months on end. And so you can imagine as a young child, up until about 8 years old, which was the last time I saw him, I was a very confused child. I didn't necessarily know why my father was leaving. And so you can imagine that that creates a lot of self-worthiness issues. And
Mm,
as I started to develop and get into different areas of my life of growth, I naturally resorted to those habitual coping mechanisms that I grew up around. And at a
mm,
very young age of about 12 years old, when I didn't know what to do with all of this anxiety that was coming from, or, void that I guess you could say I was feeling, I started to fill that void with alcohol in a very, very young formative stage of my life, about 12 years
mm,
old. Luckily, I did have a pretty good structure and foundation coupled with my parents putting me into sports. So I was around a team and growth environment every now and then. But when I was by myself, I didn't necessarily know how to sit by myself. And so, as you
yeah.
can imagine, in those very formative times, I naturally was trying to distract myself from those emotions that I didn't want to feel or understand. And as I grew older, I continued playing those sports because that was the one thing that made me happy, made me feel that self-worthiness that was not very apparent when I was a child. And so as that transitioned into middle school and high school, I played every sport under the sun that you can imagine. Again, the distraction was everything for me. And I looked at it as
Mm,
a good thing. I was a very high achiever in those sports. So I got a lot of praise from my stepfather and my biological mother and all of my friends because I was top of the class in all of these different sports. And so a lot of my worthiness came from being included in those sports. Well, you can imagine when you go to the college level, you're really only allowed to pick one
yeah.
sport to stick to. So that one sport was wrestling. One
Oh,
thing
wow.
that pulled me from that unworthiness was the sport of wrestling, mainly because it was mano a mano, one person versus another person. It's all on you. You can't necessarily blame a missed block or a missed shot on somebody else for the loss of the match. And so when I won, it filled my cup and it was something that really I started to wrap my identity around.
Hmm.
So that is the sport that actually took me into college, which I did get a scholarship. And so that was, again, some approval and validation that I was doing the right thing for my
Yeah.
life. The one issue that happened when I went to that collegiate level was on the off seasons. So in the off seasons, you're not really participating, you're not competing. You have some time to chillax, is what I always say. Well,
Hmm.
in that time period of chillaxing, again, I was constantly with my own thoughts and I didn't have that
Yeah.
distraction to separate myself from it. And so in those off seasons, I was always going off the charts, AWOL, using alcohol to subconsciously drain those emotions, the pain that I didn't want to feel. And being in
Yeah.
college, you start to experiment with certain things. So my drug of choice was cocaine. And so I
Mhm.
found myself in this constant loop of performing at a very high level during season. Then once the season was over, resorting to drugs and alcohol, and then doing that for about 3 months, and then coming back into being dialed in at a very high level. And I think that I had subconsciously convinced myself that it was okay because I was still operating at a very high level. I was top of my class. I had a 3.0 GPA, so I was still scraping by in school. So I didn't really see anything wrong about
Mm.
it because I was still operating at a very high level. Well, as you can imagine, with that identity being wrapped up in sports since about 5 or 6 years old, there's going to be an end after college. And
Yeah.
so that identity was really, it took a big hit after I graduated from college. And so my senior year, I was like, what am I going to do? I think I just have to go into the corporate world. And that's what I did. And so I graduated with a business management degree and I went into the corporate world, working into marketing in a tech company. And I found myself constantly with those thoughts that I was filling that void with drugs and alcohol in the off season 24/7. And so there was a huge identity crisis that came with that because I didn't know who I was without the sport of wrestling or without sports in general.
Yeah.
And that is really what transpired up the formative years of my life and that addiction of I was addicted to sports and then I was addicted to drugs and alcohol in the off season. And as I grew and then didn't have the sport, and the only thing that I had to really fill that void was the drugs and alcohol, that
Yeah.
is what I was constantly chasing every single day and every single weekend after I had graduated from college. Well, that can't be very sustainable.
No.
And it was a very apparent. I was living with my parents at the time, and it was living in their basement. And there was one weekend where I hadn't come home till about 5 a.m. And as a worried mother, she came down into my room and she was like, John, I am really noticing that I don't know who you are anymore. You're never here. You never talk to us. And a lot of that came from the fact that I was ashamed of the person that I was becoming and the things that I was
Yeah.
doing. And I had a very clear understanding of what I was doing in my life, but for some reason, I couldn't change it in that moment. And so that was really the pivotal moment of talking to my mom, talking to somebody that I really, really loved and that I also knew loved me.
That you were
And I was like, I
disappointing.
looked in the mirror and I said, is this the life that I really want to create for myself? I've been a successful person in school, I've been a successful athlete, but what am I creating right now? That is not the person I want to create. And so I went into intensive therapy. I said, I'm going to take all the skill sets that I took from college sports, which was having a mentor or a coach and
Yeah.
giving my all in exactly the roadmap that they give me. And now I'm going to do the same thing, but for my mind. And so I hired a therapist, and 2 times a week for about a year, I went to that cognitive intensive therapy. I sought the help that I really needed and started to unpack all of these things of
Mm.
why I was resorting to that drug and alcohol abuse. And so
All the
that was what
trauma.
catapulted me.
Yeah,
Exactly.
the life of trauma, and I often have guests to talk about trauma because it isn't coming out of a burning building or surviving war or what, it's the day-to-day life that we live that creates these memories that block us from being our true um, greatness.
Definitely. And I think as we start to understand ourselves more, we understand that the stories that we tell ourselves do not always have to be consistent
Mm.
from the past. And that was a big one for me. I didn't think that I was worthy. And so I was telling myself that story my whole life until the point where all I had to do was hold the little promises that I made to myself every single day and stick with those. And that's really where the beauty started to sprout and these flowers started to bloom.
Yeah. So your past does not have to be your story for your future. And, that's why I always talk about the journey. And a lot of times I think, in every aspect, mind and body, if we understand how important it is to live in the present, to just focus on the present. So then that means that your goals don't have to be these big, audacious goals, that the small things are what's important. And after day one, day two, reflect and be grateful for those small things in day one, and just take it one day at a time.
That's beautiful.
I love that, you were able to seek help, that you saw in yourself that need, and that you'd attributed it to a mentor or a coach, as opposed to, my mind is doing crazy things and I must be crazy and I'm going to have to go to a psychiatrist or a therapist and think of the bad things. And, I'm luckily, in the age where I think talk therapy and all that is very, very healthful and helpful. And I do attribute it a lot of times, coaches and mentors, as that sounding board. But I think it's important for the audience to recognize that, even if you're an older person in your 70s and 80s, where it was not the thing that you didn't talk about going to therapy, you didn't admit you went to therapy because people would think you're crazy. But, there's a whole lot of stuff everybody's gone through, especially in the last couple, 3 years, that they need that. They need someone to talk through this because, as I said, trauma comes knocking on your door in places most unexpected.
I love that. And I think just you hit the nail on the head. And I think with where we're at in this day and age, platforms like yours, Vicky, really allows people to understand that it is okay.
Yeah.
And that there are resources and there are people, mentors, therapists, coaches out there through other people's stories. And I think that's what we're doing here today is you've created a platform for people to understand that, you know, we all deal with our own traumas. It's all relative to our own life. And whether my message is the same as somebody else, that's not really the main point here. It's more
Right.
so, well, what is the trauma that's happened in my life and how has it consumed me to this point? And how can I take control of that through certain avenues that other people have always also navigated through their traumas?
And I think, as you said it earlier, the 6 inches between your two ears is a great foundation to start working on, because you really can't address how you look or feel, um, lose weight, be successful, come in with a positive mindset, if you're always having those negative thoughts from the past that are holding you back, from really achieving what you can achieve. So, can you just spend some time in this space of talking about the role of fitness and grit? You talked over and over about how, when you were in that sports mindset, you were able to perform because, I think, because you had a consistency and a program and goals, again, the small goals every day. But those of you that are in business, think about the times where, you know, as people retire, a lot of them don't make it that long because their purpose, just like your sport, was to get up to work, to tell people what to do or have people tell you what to do. And now you don't have that. And now you don't have a purpose.
Right.
So there's such a great synergy between the sport as well as in business. But again, the fitness piece, I think, is so key for having that consistency and a program. So let's
Definitely.
talk about that a little.
Yes, you're spot on, and I could talk about this stuff for hours because there's countless reasons why fitness in itself trickles down into all of these other pillars of our lives. And so one thing that I constantly tell my clients that are trying to operate at a very high level, that are trying to perform well in their businesses, that are trying to lead teams, be that high level executive, is one thing. Your business can only grow to the extent of your own internal growth. And so
Mhm.
that 6 inches between your two ears, we have to understand what it looks like to actually grow that thing, because our brain is just like any other muscle.
Yeah.
If we stop working it out, well, then it's going to stop growing. And
Yeah.
that's where this point of plateau really starts to happen in all of these pillars of our life. The way that we're showing up in our relationships, the way that we're showing up in our business, the way that we're leading
Mm.
our team, the way that we're looking at the mirror, the self-esteem that we have, the high
Right.
energy that we're coming to the table with. All of these pillars are affected by that one thing, the mind and the body and the alignment between the two. And so with my story, the first step in becoming the boss of my life is what I always like to say. We all have to be the boss of our lives,
Yeah.
was getting to the gym, because that was one thing that I knew that the seeds of confidence
Yeah.
really stemmed from. And so in that moment of confusion, not knowing who I was or what I was or what I was doing or why I was doing it, I knew one thing that had been consistent throughout my entire life. And that is, where did I get my confidence from? That was in a gym. Whether it was a wrestling gym or a baseball field or a football field or a swimming pool, I knew that it was in an environment where I was having resistance within my muscles. So
Mm-hmm.
ultimately, I said, okay, I know how to do one thing. So I'm going to go to the gym right now, go back to my roots. I'm going to embrace my past, and I'm going to take this one day at a time and see if this works. And so sure enough, one day at a time, one rep at a time, the gym really became this playground of
Mm.
self-exploration, because I was in there and having these conversations with yourself, right? It's you versus you, which is why I love the sport of wrestling in a way, because
Mhm.
nobody's seeing those long hours of cutting weight in a dark gym in the middle of the night when you have to make weight in the morning. And so I started to use all of these past experiences from my sport as the fuel for the circumstances that I was dealing with in my current life and the current challenges that I was dealing with. And so, I would ask myself, how much stronger can I get? How hard can I push myself? And then after a few weeks of that consistency, something really clicked. It was this direct correlation of life and how I'm actually able to show up and perceive and navigate through this world directly correlated to the weights that I was pushing. So every new
Mm.
challenge that I have, well, that's going to correlate to how much more weight can I push or how much longer can I run. And in
Yeah.
those moments that the external challenges come, you can relay that back to the confidence that you're building inside of that gym. And that is what's pushing you forward through that self-confidence. And now you start to show up in the world in all of these ways so much better.
Yeah. And the reward that you have, I think, in doing those things is really kind of aligned with as we do in our business and things, the small things that seem unseen to others build and build and build. And then at the next moment, you'll see, you know, that you've got this body that's unexpectedly nice and you have this business that is doing well. It wasn't an overnight success. It wasn't some magical wand that was used. It was that consistency and being resilient and getting up when you're knocked down and knowing that each time you do that new rep or new exercise, it's not going to feel great. But as you do it more and more, it becomes more comfortable. And that's when you know you have to go and do something outside that comfort zone to make a difference, to make those muscles grow in a different way, just as you do in business.
Definitely. I think one thing that always comes into the forefront of my mind when I'm switching things up, whether it's in a fitness routine or maybe just hopping in the cold plunge or sitting in the sauna, something that is not very enjoyable. I've done a lot of research on the human mind, and one of my favorite people that I like to listen to is Andrew Huberman.
Mm,
And he really takes a deep dive analysis of how the brain operates and certain chemicals that are released when you're doing
yeah.
hard things. Well, the brain, like, yes, for example, if I actually enjoy going to the gym and I look forward to it, your brain is not actually growing in the same fashion as if you were going to the gym and you absolutely hated it. So you constantly have to remind yourself to do the
Yeah.
things that you do not enjoy doing so that your brain can continue to grow. And in our day and age, I feel like we're constantly going to the comfort zone because it's easier. And naturally, our brains are going to try to protect ourselves. So they're naturally going to do that. But I can tell you, the more you step into that challenge, the easier it's going to be to face those challenges, which then are directly correlated with all of those things that I had just mentioned. So,
Yeah. And I think it's just a good reminder for those in my audience that are my age or approaching my age that, oftentimes we think, oh, well, when I retire, that's my time to slow down, to relax. I owe it to myself. I worked hard all these 40 years or whatever. I don't need to do. But as soon as you have that mindset, you do stop growing. You really are just paving your way to not good things. And so maybe it is just every day you're going to take a walk, or maybe it is every day you're going to just make sure that you meet with people, keep your social skills, because that's, aspect of it, of having community around you, is what you were maybe missing when you retired, or like you talked about going to the gym and having people with like mindsets and goals, and that it makes you happy. It does have those endorphins come out.
definitely. And I think on that note, when we talk about some of you folks that may be nearing that retirement age, we have to think about why we're doing these things. We're not picking up the weights to necessarily look a certain way anymore.
Yeah.
Yes, that is a cherry on top of looking better in the mirror, but the main goal here is always going to be sustainable health. What
Yeah.
can I do when I'm throwing the ball with my grandson? Or what can I do when I'm carrying my groceries in from the car? Or how am I going to be walking up the stairs, the 3 flights of stairs or 2 flights of stairs that you have in your home? Those are the things that we're really training for. And
Yeah.
the body composition element is just that cherry on top that you
Yeah.
mentioned.
Absolutely. So in the beginning, we talked about your story and stress of our jobs, and again the callback of trauma that we've suppressed, pushed down year after year. At certain points we can't push it down any longer. So talk to the audience, of how they might be able to redirect their lives and find purpose to be able to, I don't want to say forget about the trauma, but to deal with it, stop pushing it down. Give them some words of wisdom.
Yes, of course. And I think this conversation is very nuanced because we all have different traumatic experiences. We all have those habitual coping mechanisms,
Yeah.
whether it's drugs or alcohol, or whether it's stress eating, or whether it's not eating at all, or whatever the case may be. So, what I always like to say is there's two things here. I always like to use this expression of looking in the mirror and seeing where it's foggy, and not from a literal
Yeah.
analogy, but more so in your mind when you know that you don't like to think about certain things. That is a fogginess part of that mirror. And so when we bring light to that fog, we can understand that there is something there. And the whole idea of this is just bringing awareness to what that
Yeah.
thing is. And the more we can lead with the curiosity rather than judging them as good or bad things, the more we can actually strip the power that whatever that thing is has over us. And so I would say start to take those I would say analysis of your mental thoughts, and understand if you can go on a 20-minute walk and you're thinking about certain things, the more conversations that you can have with yourself,
Mm.
that is naturally going to bring awareness to certain things that you don't want to think about. And that's why you find a lot of people do not want to be alone, because they're naturally thinking of those things that were traumatic experiences from the past. So we're going to habitually distract ourselves from those thoughts, which is exactly what I was doing in my journey.
Yeah.
So a good action step would be spend some time alone. Take a 30-minute walk and really just analyze your thoughts. Just let those thoughts come through. And when there's one that maybe isn't good, don't judge it or label it as bad. Just say, okay, that's a thought. What does this mean? Lead with that curiosity and start to understand where that may have come from. And you'll start to notice the more you lead with curiosity rather than judgment of the emotion or thought, the more clarity you have around what can actually be done here.
Yeah.
And that is where I would say it really is the starting point of where that fog really lies in the mirror so that you can go start to clean some of that fog up.
Oh, awesome. So in our last question, I'd love for you to talk about the importance of setting boundaries, managing your time effectively so you can achieve both your personal and professional. We, I think we have a hard time of saying no, and and then that leads us to say yes to things, it's just such a, we worry about so many things, again going back to just living for the presence, but we put so much importance, I think, on um being that perfect mom, that perfect dad, that perfect worker, that perfect sports player, whatever, athlete. And we don't give us ourselves permission to have those boundaries, having those non-negotiables. And therefore our time effectiveness, efficiency, management is often kind of screwed up. So talk about some tips for folks of the importance of setting those boundaries and how they can maybe better manage their time.
Yes, of course. So we all have 24 hours in our day. Now, one thing that I don't really like when people say is we all have the same 24 hours.
Yeah.
That is true. We all have 24 hours, but we do not have the same 24 hours. And so, with that being said, we have to learn how to optimize these habits, these rituals, and these routines, and really understand where these constraints might lie or inhibit us from moving the needle in our personal lives, in our business lives. So we have to align our mind and our body and our rituals and our routines that is cohesive in a way that's going to set us up for success in those 24 hours. Now,
Mm.
how do we do that, John? Well, through prioritization and setting boundaries, like you mentioned, you can carve out the necessary time for self-care and really personal development. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I do in the morning, because as we start our mornings, we're now setting the tone for the day.
Yeah.
And so that doesn't mean that we're rolling over and checking our email or checking our text thread right after we wake up, we wake up, because that's going to spike the anxiety and that's going to spike the stress hormones. And now we've just set that time or that energy for the rest of the day. And so I would say that we have to understand one thing in the morning that can set us up for the success that we're really trying to see. The only way we can do that is through boundaries, meaning the night before, if we know we're going to bed super late and we're waking up at 5 a.m., well, maybe we have to start putting some boundaries around the time that we're taking for ourselves at night. Maybe we're watching Netflix or we're binging a television show. Maybe we say, let's have an hour, let's cut this back 1 hour, go to bed a little bit earlier so that I can set myself up for that success to start my day in the morning. Because if my main goal is to optimize my time and to optimize my mind and my body, that is the one thing that I need to do to really step into that full potential. So we have to really identify what are most important tasks and allocating time for exercise, for meditation, for reflection. You can optimize your time through a little bit of, I would say, really just awareness, to keep it really simple.
Mm-hmm.
Just look at your day right now and see where there's some time gaps of, okay, am I doing some mindless scrolling? Am I binge watching TV? Am I talking on the phone? What am I doing? Let's take an analysis of my current day. And then we can start to understand within those time gaps where we can implement the exercise, the meditation, the reflection. And I always say to my clients, you try this for 1 week and we meet again and you tell me how you feel, it is always the same response. Wow, I never knew that 10 minutes in the morning doing a quick
Mm,
meditation could actually change the whole paradigm of my day or my week. And now we start to subconsciously convince ourselves that what we're doing is actually right. So I would
mm,
say that setting those clear boundaries is really going to maximize your time and your energy. And just like you said, learning how to say no to certain activities and commitments that do not align with those goals or values is now going to allow you to focus on what truly matters. And so
yeah.
that boundaries, the boundaries and the prioritization are those two main things that I talk about when we're maximizing or optimizing our time.
And I think, a lot of my audience are female entrepreneurs and corporate people. And I think it's really important for that group to understand that the 5 or 10 minutes that you do in the morning for that meditation, that quiet time, really is strengthening you for all that's going to come at you. But, the moms can know you had a great morning until your kids aren't wanting to go to school, or they've told you 2 minutes before you're supposed to leave that they have a project due, or they throw a fit as you're driving in, and that sets the way the rest of your day can go. So how are you going to be able to manage that to not have it impact you negatively? For me, that's going back and just assessing the things you're grateful for, doing some in your meditation, doing some words that will be positive and bring you back to that right space in your mind.
Definitely, definitely. I think one thing I always like to talk about in junction with that is where are we congruent in the things that we say we want and the things we're doing. And so
Oh,
if
yeah.
we don't want a super stressful and anxious life, and we may have 3 children and we may be running a multi-million-dollar business and we may be doing X, Y, and Z and running kids from practice to practice, okay, that is okay. We can understand that that is okay. But we have to know that that congruency of what we're trying to achieve can only go so far if we're not putting those boundaries or constraints around the things within that 24 hours that are not in alignment with that. And that can be a very, very difficult thing. But just like how any habit is formed, the more consistent you are with it, the easier it gets. And really, on the back end, the more freedom you feel because you're not so wound up and uptight.
Absolutely. Well, we could probably talk for days on this subject. Definitely enjoyed having you as a guest, but it's time now for us to share the slide of your contact information. If you that are listening have been intrigued, interested, and see value in what John is talking about and want to connect with him, I'm going to share his contact information. If you are just listening, you should have been taking notes all along and been able to get this information, but it is going to be on my YouTube channel, Vicki Nethling. Please subscribe, as well as my findyourleadershipconfidence.com. But if you are watching and you can grab a screenshot, then do so. The website is simplesavagefitness.com. Again, simplesavagefitness.com. On Instagram, he's at @onlyjohndaniel. Again, at @onlyjohndaniel. I'm going to turn it over to John to talk to you about his call to action for today.
Yeah, guys. So if you are an individual that is living that very anxious, stressful, chaotic life, maybe have a few kids, maybe you're running a business, maybe you're just a leader in a business, either way, we have to understand that time optimization is all about making deliberate choices and commitments that are prioritizing your health and your fitness, as we've talked about in this podcast today. So by managing your time effectively and setting these boundaries, you can create the space and the opportunity to cultivate a fit mind and fit body to set you up and empower you to live the best and happiest life that you want. So I would tell you to go snag the time optimization resource that I have both on my website and also linked in this podcast for you to go take a look at. It's going to be a good starting point where you can start to understand the constraints that you may have in your life that are holding you back from stepping into that boss of your life.
Awesome. Well, John, as I said, it's been a pleasure chatting with you. I think we've had a great conversation and love share the stories that you shared. I think that they resonate across the audience, and I hope that people will go and check out his website as well as his LinkedIn and take advantage of that time optimization guide. I think it's going to be a great tool for all of you. As always, I remind everyone that life is a journey and it's up to you to enjoy the ride. This is Vicki Nethling signing off.
Thank you for tuning into the Find Your Leadership Confidence podcast with Vicki Nethling, where we share impactful lessons that help you grow as an individual, grow your confidence, and find the positive and good within you so you powerfully and authentically become the best version of yourself. Remember to visit our website at www.findyourleadershipconfidence.com and enjoy even more great episodes like this one. Again, while you're here, subscribe to us via your favorite network. We look forward to seeing you next time on the Find Your Leadership Confidence podcast.